Hi, welcome back to Let's Taste It. I was just thinking about making myself a snack, and you know what always sounds good? French toast. But I couldn't help but wonder, is French toast actually French? Well, before we chow down, I think it's important to answer that question. Let's dig in. Throughout history, many cultures have been taking old, stale bread, soaking it in a mixture of egg and milk, and frying it to make it more palatable, thus getting as much use out of it as possible. The recipe for French toast actually predates the founding of France itself. The first reference to something resembling French toast dates back to an ancient Roman cookbook called Apicius. The French used to call it pain à la romane, or Roman bread, until the 15th century when it got the name pain perdu, or lost bread, which it's still called today. French toast has been known by many names in different countries throughout history. German toast, nun's toast, Spanish toast, eggy bread. So why do we call it French? Some believe it's actually a reference to an innkeeper in Albany, New York named Joseph French rather than France the country. Legend has it that French was the inventor of the dish and intended to name it after himself, but he was grammatically inept and forgot the apostrophe. So instead of French's toast, he simply dropped the S and it became French toast. Most likely, calling the dish French was a way to make it sound fancier and more gastronomically appealing on menus when it made its way over to America. In France, the dish is much sweeter and typically served as dessert, but most people think of French toast as exclusively a breakfast food. To me, the perfect breakfast beverage is coffee. I make mine with a French press, but that might not be French either. Early designs can be traced back to France in 1852, but this version didn't create a seal and is functionally very different from the one we use today. The French press didn't become popular until the design was perfected and patented by two Italian designers in 1928. But it was a Swiss designer who introduced the modern French press in 1958. Well, now that we've talked about breakfast, it makes sense for us to talk about lunch. To me, the perfect lunch is a sandwich, and all this talk of French food makes me want a French dip. But that's also not really French. There's some debate about who exactly invented the French dip, but everyone agrees on where it originated: Los Angeles. Specifically, two LA restaurants claim to be the originator of the sandwich, with each having a strong case to back this up. Both can trace their French dips back to 1918, and both are still in operation to this day. The first is Felipe's, which proudly states that it is the home of the original French dip, and even offers three possible stories for how the French dip could have been invented. One is that a customer simply saw some gravy in the bottom of the roast beef pan and asked the owner if he could dip the sandwich into the sauce. A second theory is that a regular would often come in to buy stale leftover rolls. When they complained that the bread was too tough, Felipe dipped it in some meat juices in order to soften it. The third and most widely accepted story is that one day while preparing an order for a customer, Felipe accidentally dropped a sandwich into a pan of juice. Since the customer was in a hurry, he decided to take the sandwich as it was and return the next day asking for the same thing. As for the name, there are a number of explanations offered as well. Some cite Felipe's French heritage, which gave him the nickname French or Frenchy. Some say it's because the sandwich is served on a French roll, and still others suggest that the customer who received the soggy sandwich had the last name French. Cole's Pacific Electric Buffet has also laid claim to being home of the French dip, though strong evidence suggests they started serving the sandwich slightly after Felipe did. Here, the sandwich is served with a cup of meat juice on the side rather than pre-dipped. Many sandwich aficionados believe this helps the bread retain its integrity, thus resulting in a better sandwich experience. No matter how you prefer your sandwich, it's best practice to order them with a big old pile of French fries on the side, which are, of course, also not French. Thomas Jefferson may have been one of the first Americans to discover an early version of French fries. From 1784 to 1789, Jefferson was the American minister to France. He was also a big lover of food, even taking his slave James Hemming with him to Paris specifically to learn the art of French cooking. Among the many recipes Jefferson brought back to America, there is a mention of potatoes deep fried while raw in small cuttings. In other words, fried potatoes, which were sold by Parisian street vendors much like they are today. But these wouldn't have looked much like French fries, since early potatoes were about the size of a golf ball and extremely lumpy. Most likely these would have been cut and served as small discs. The potato itself was probably introduced to Europe by the Spanish, as they were the first Europeans to encounter it in South America. Throughout Spain's culinary history, frying food in oil is pretty common, so it would make sense for potatoes to receive the same treatment. But French fries as we think of them today probably originated in Belgium. As the story goes, soldiers serving during World War I were introduced to les frites by the Belgian army, and since the predominant language spoken was French, they were Americanized into French fries. But there was a time when they weren't called French fries here in America. In 2003, the term freedom fries was coined to protest France's refusal to support the invasion of Iraq. This is not the first time something like this has happened. During World War I, German sauerkraut was interestingly renamed Liberty cabbage. No matter what you call your fries, most people agree they're best served with a side of ketchup. Maybe some French's ketchup? Which of course is also not French. It's named after the company's founder, Robert Timothy French. Speaking of ketchup, many people believe it's a key ingredient in another not-so-French condiment, French dressing. Traditionally, French dressing would have been a vinaigrette made from 3 parts oil, 1 part vinegar, some salt, maybe some Dijon mustard, shallots, garlic. A far cry from the French dressing we have today. But rumor has it if you mix these ingredients with ketchup, there you have French dressing. But that's probably not the case. And surprisingly, French dressing's origins are pretty vague. The first French dressing I could find resembling the one we have today was Milani 1890 French dressing, though it's unclear if this was ever a vinaigrette or if it was always the creamy orange concoction. In 1925, Kraft, formerly Just a Cheese Company, entered the salad dressing business after acquiring several regional mayonnaise manufacturers as well as the Milani Company. To be sure, the first dressing they introduced was French dressing, more or less the same French dressing they still sell today. But as to how this recipe came to be, there's really not an answer. Apparently over time, ingredients like tomato puree, high fructose corn syrup, and paprika were added one by one until we ended up with the modern French dressing. It's interesting that we can trace something like French toast back to ancient times, but something invented less than 100 years ago remains a mystery. C'est la vie. Now let me know your favorite French food, authentic or otherwise, down in the comments. That should do it, and thank you very much.